Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be looking in depth at Rodtang versus Jonathan Haggerty number 2, and from the footage that I provide, I'm going to give you my analysis on how Rodtang could be defeated. Now, before we get the episode to the analysis stage, where I start looking at video footage, I want to say I have absolutely nothing against Rodtang. I'm not providing this video because I want people to defeat him. I want to give all the subscribers on my channel a view into how I might look at fight footage and how I might come up with a solution on how to beat somebody who just seems indestructible, unstoppable. And Rodtang is the perfect example of one of those fighters right now. He's on a massive win streak. People look at him and they just go, oh, this guy, how do you take him down? How do you beat him? Like, he's just trucks forward and just doesn't stop. And his record is just amazing. And he just looks like he's so hard in any aspect to defeat. So that is the reason I chose Rodtang for the start of this potential series. If this is a series you'd like to see me continue with, you can let me know by giving the video a like, throwing down in the comments below specific fighters you want to see me break down and see me give my analysis on how you might go about defeating them. Now, keep in mind that just because this is the way I think I would go about fighting Rodtang doesn't mean it's going to work for anybody else. This is just things that I note. And if I was putting together a fight camp and I was going, how am I going to defeat Rodtang? Or I had a fighter, how is he going to defeat Rodtang? These are the things that I would be training. I would make sure that is part of the training camp. But once again, this guy is so good. He's so spectacular that they might not work for some people anyway. So let's just get this episode started and let's look at how Rodtang defeated Jonathan Haggerty in their second fight, but things that could be implemented to make sure that you have a chance of victory against this little iron tank. So the very first thing that we have to look at and we have to respect about Rodtang is his left hook. And the fact that he, from out here, will just, boom, he just leads, boom, with it so often. And it was the trouble that started everything going downhill for Jonathan Haggerty, because Rodtang would just step forward, slam that body shot in, Jonathan Haggerty would take it, and down he goes. When somebody has such a powerful shot that is just a single, they just boom, right into it, it's very, very difficult to stop because there's no setup. It's not like somebody's coming in and going, oh, they have a crazy hard left body hook, but it always comes after 1, 2. It's always 1, 2, 3. And when that happens, you have a signal that it's coming. But in this instance, with Rodtang just stepping in and firing, you have basically two options. Number one, you just basically have to go, okay, he's coming with a big wide shot. And normally I would say when somebody comes with a big wide shot, beat them with the slower wide shot with a big straight punch down the middle. But the problem with trying to initiate that against Rodtang is he's just so tough that he'll take the headshot to give the body shot. So that normal tactic, in my opinion, will not work. It might be something that you think would work, but I don't think it will. He steps in with the big shot. I go here. I expose my ribs. He takes it off the head because shots to his head just don't really seem to hurt him. And then all of a sudden you're on the ground because you expose your rib cage. No, this is just an example of me sharing with you what might normally work with the average person, but does not work with Rodtang. The answer, in my opinion, to that vicious lead arm hook coming at both levels is you have to get yourself out of the way, but you have to respond with something. And the only possible way I can think of doing this is every time you see him come forward, you have to back up with the jab. You have to back up with the jab to stop him. Otherwise, he's going to come one and he's going to step in with a second shot and he's going to gain momentum. But if you can step back and stick that stiff jab, every time you see him go to throw a body shot or a head hook, you're going to at least land something and stop the momentum at the same time. Now, again, it's not a perfect system. Doesn't mean just because I'm saying to try it against somebody like him, it's going to work. But if I was fighting Rodtang, that would be my go-to thing. Every time I see him move forward, boom, and I have to stop him. Again, with somebody like Rodtang, easier said than done, but that is my first point, the first analysis of Jonathan Haggerty facing Rodtang. Something that if Jonathan Haggerty was to fight him for a third time, that he might want to start implementing. The second thing I want to talk about when you're facing Rodtang is the necessity to finish hand combos with a round kick. Now, why is this so important? Well, in Rodtang, we'll see him take shots off the head, or guard up and fire back. He's very good at that. He's very good at firing back, and it will make people hesitant on entering and then stopping the punch. Essentially, you only have a couple options. You have to jump in and get out really fast, but that makes you very hesitant. Or you stick with long shots, you fire the kick, which when you fire the kick, seems to give yourself a little bit more opportunity. When I watch this fight, when I see Haggerty finish with a kick, it gives him more opportunity to exit than when he finishes with his hands. When he finishes with his hands, Rodtang is on him. When he finishes with a kick, he has that little instant where he's now able to go, okay, I'm going to exit, and then maybe try and utilize that jab if Rodtang comes in with the big hook, which we already talked about, or you just have to go, okay, I got to angle off and get out of the way before he starts coming towards me. So that would be the second thing I would work if I was in training camp. I wouldn't just be going, it would be always 1, 2, 3, finish with a kick. 1, 2, 3, finish with the kick. Now, something else that makes Rodtang very good, which you would have to overcome, is either his ability to guard up. He's very good at that, but equally, and something that you have to be able to deal with, is his ability to fade back on punches. He'll either step and fade back, or he'll just fade back, which gets his head so far out of the way that it's hard to continue building any momentum on the combos. What you need to do when you see a fighter move their head backwards is switch levels on them. You need to use that split second where they're here, when they're in this position where they cannot counter back, to land something either to the body or down to the leg. And with Rodtang, because we already talked about finishing with a kick, we don't want to stay in front of him for too long for him to be able to get that counter shot going. So if I throw my shot and I see, okay, he's faded back and this missed, well, then I have to slam the low kick in, or I have to come off the jab and then slam the body shot in, and then from there I exit, I disengage. I go, okay, I won the exchange, that's enough. Now I'm going to move around a little bit. I'm going to make him come to me. I'll stop him with that jab a couple times, and then I'll come for my combo, hope he leans backwards, and then again I come down to the body or to the leg, and just bit by bit we're chipping away at the scorecard. Now, something very interesting which I note about Rodtang when he fights Haggerty in the second fight, which is very different from your average Thai fighter, is he blocks round kicks to the body with his arms. He doesn't get the check off and come with his own round kick back. He just does this, or ends up taking it off the forearm by itself. Doesn't even cross block. And he does not counter a lot of times off the round kick to the body. That right there is gift. That's a gift that you have to take advantage of. And we already talked about throwing shots and then coming with a round kick after. And that is basically why when we see somebody who does not counter round kicks, we go, we have to continue throwing them. So whether it's at the end of the punches, which we already talked about, or you just lace in some individual kicks, you have to recognize this is an area of weakness for this person, something which they're not looking to exploit, somewhere where they are not countering back, and you have to throw, and you have to throw, and you have to throw. You have to almost maybe go in Bukau style, where instead of having your upper body set up the kicks, you have your kicks almost like your jab, and they set up a couple power shots here and there. Your kicks become the main priority of your offense. Now again, I'm not saying this is perfect and it's going to work, because very well he might end up catching the kicks, or he might end up fading back and throwing something after, but it's a start. It's somewhere where you see a chink in the armor and you go, okay, instead of coming forward on this guy and just throwing up to his head, which is a terrible plan, we're going to get some kicks going, and we might be able, again, to chip away at the scorecard and start stealing rounds here and there. Something else that is terrible to allow happen to yourself is to be pressured backwards without responding. And we see Haggerty do this a couple times in the fight. It is terrible because this guy has no reason to stop going forward, and you end up getting that Rodtang sort of response where he just becomes like a rhino and he just does not stop that forward momentum. We already talked about initiating the jab as you move backwards. Now, that's not necessarily going to stop somebody. It'll give you some respect initially, but sometimes also you're going to have to just make sure you bang a hard shot in, maybe off the backhand, maybe as they enter off the hook. You're going to have to get respect. But absolutely one of the worst things you can do is just back up, back up, back up as somebody walks you down like Rodtang. They're just coming towards you. You can't let that happen, especially if you're letting your back hit the ring ropes and now you have nowhere to go, and now he knows he has you cornered, and you just let that happen. because he pressured in. Absolute, well, not worst thing you can do, but one of the worst things you can let happen. So if I was training for Rodtang, I would be drilling, never let that happen. Never back up without throwing something. Never back up without cutting an angle. There are some things you just cannot do against certain fighters, and backing straight up with no counter shots and no angles is just one of those things in Rodtang as an opponent. Now, we already talked about utilizing the round kick at the end of the punch combos, or just going Bokao style and throwing some round kicks in place offensively. But something else I see Jonathan Haggerty utilizing quite nicely and Rodtang not responding is a defensive round kick. That is when somebody engages towards you, and instead of throwing your kick sideways where you're trying to knock them this direction, you bring your shin up as basically a barrier. If they come forward, they're going to slam into your shin. So as you see forwards momentum, you throw your round kick and you let that shin be a shield, which they will move into and therefore hurt themselves more if they decide to put more forwards pressure. This is something which should be a go-to against Rodtang. A defensive lead leg round kick with no skip. Hands are up, you see him coming, you fade your head back, you drop your weight to your back leg, and you slam that shin right into his body. And as we already talked about, he does not counter a whole lot off the body round kicks. It's also very hard to catch round kicks as you're moving forward, especially if you're trying to let punches go. That is the worst thing you can do. If you step forward, pressure, and punch, and you take that round kick, everything is exposed. So this is something which, if you were facing Rodtang and you wanted to defeat him, you have those offensive kicks, which we talked about, which is sort of Bokao style, and now you have the defensive round kicks to stop this guy, and then in between you also have your jab to try and stop him if you're too slow on your defensive round kick. And guys, before we move on to my next point on how I would go about defeating Rodtang, if you're enjoying the episode, if you like the idea of this series continuing going forward, please give the video a like, and let's move on to the next point. Now, the next thing I want to just say, which is something we don't see in this fight, Haggerty versus Rodtang number 2, but if I was looking at defeating Rodtang and I went, shoot, this guy is just coming forward, he's coming forward, and my hand's up here, and having him hit me off the shell is just not working, something else to think about, to consider, is engaging head movement. Now, that is a dangerous thing in Muay Thai or kickboxing, which is why we don't see as much head movement as maybe in MMA or boxing. But sometimes you have to look at certain opponents and just go, you know what? The normal style of the way you're supposed to do things is not working. And maybe with this guy, when he comes forward, I'm going to have to move my head. It's very simply, he is so powerful, he has so much pressure, that moving my head and then trying to close the space is something that'll work better. So that is something that I would say would be worth consideration if I was structuring a camp to get ready to deal with somebody with the pressure that Rodtang brings, where he's just trucking forward. Get that head movement on point. The final thing I want to talk about, which we see Rodtang do against Haggerty and so many other opponents, is his relentless, non-stop, scary pressure. When he gets going, and I watch him, I'm almost going, holy smokes. How do you stop this guy? How can it possibly be done? He is just like a beast moving forward that you cannot slow down. But you always can, if you utilize the right techniques against somebody. So the first thing that I would be saying when he gets into that motion is you have to have some off-balancing techniques. When somebody is trucking forward and you can off-balance them, it's the perfect way to cause them to have to reset. Off-balancing techniques could be something like, instead of throwing an inside low, I go down to the ankle and I just kind of pick the ankle out, so that when they move forward, their leg gets pulled out and they're off balance for a split second. It could be by closing the gap and trying to initiate a sweep. If that's not working, then we start utilizing that defensive round kick, which we already talked about. And then finally, we go, okay, we're gonna have to get some respect here to slow him down. So we move in as he moves in with a couple hard punches, and then we obviously have to initiate the clinch. And the clinch is gonna be a must. And yes, you will take warnings for falling into the clinch, but it's better than seeing this guy come forward, you back up a step, and then you go boom, boom, and then stand there and let him counter. It has to be you back up, you step in, boom, boom, and then you close the gap and you fall to the clinch. And it's not the perfect solution because Rodtang's clinch is also very good. His throws are very good. But if you're looking at trying to stop damage at this point, when he's moving forward and he's trying to go for the KO, I'd much rather be throwing down to the ground than have him unleash hard, powerful shots, especially if we're talking about 4-ounce gloves. And overall, guys, those are my main points. Now, don't click off yet because I want to run a couple more things by you. Number one, if you like this series and you like the idea of me looking at fighters who are almost indestructible, undefeatable, please let me know in the comments below, because like I said, this is a new series which I'm considering bringing to the channel. You're welcome to throw down names of people you would like to see me break down, and I have nothing against these fighters, and the reality is that their future opponents aren't even going to see these videos. They aren't going to be studying them, and even if they do, it might not be the right strategy for those guys. This is just the strategy that I would implement. Now, another thing that I want to point out, which is very interesting because we're talking about Rodtang being so dangerous here, but his next fight, I believe on March 26th in 1FC, is against former UFC champion Demetrious Johnson. And Demetrious Johnson is going to be facing him in a multi-rule set fight. I believe it is a 4-minute round in round 1 of Muay Thai. And then they move to a 4-minute round of MMA for round 2. And then for round 3, back to Muay Thai. And then round 4, back to MMA. And we've talked about how crazy good Rodtang is here. But I just want to give you guys a little snapshot into how I think this fight is going to play out. Demetrious Johnson is no slouch on his feet. And I don't think with his evasiveness and the slipping abilities, which we talked about in this video, that's something to utilize against Rodtang, and Demetrious Johnson has them from being an MMA champion. I think it's going to be a little harder for Rodtang to catch him in those first 4 minutes. If Rodtang can score a KO, I will be stunned. If Demetrious Johnson can get a submission in round 2, I will not be stunned. I see that happening very easy. I see a takedown being relatively easy for him once the rule set changes. So even though through this video we've talked about how amazing Rodtang is, in his next fight, he might not get the win. But that's simply because he's going up against one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time, and he only has 4 minutes to make sure he gets the fight done before he ends up in MMA territory. Very interesting rule set, very dangerous for Rodtang, I think. And I'm very excited to see that first round because it puts a 4-minute clock on somebody. It's basically like some fight sports we've seen in the past where they put a super fast clock on it, like Chuck Norris, that promotion used to have where it was 1 round, 3 minutes. You got to get a lot done. Well, Rodtang has 4 minutes. I would suggest marking your calendars for the 26th of March and making sure you check that fight out, if not live, at least without getting some spoilers. So that's all from me today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you haven't already, join the channel, get subscribed for lots of content coming at you daily right now. And as always, train super hard. I'll see you back here soon for another video.